You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, where we do fast, fun, free daily deep dives into books of the Bible. And right now, we're going through Esther.
What am I doing? I try really hard at this. You need to know that. I really do. I care about it. I look forward to talking with you. It's a lot of fun for me. It's been very, very meaningful. But sometimes I forget stuff, and then I'm super embarrassed. Like today, because right here in front of me, I have a sheet of Xerox paper that I keep here until it gets full. I got a pen, and I got the Xerox paper, and I got my Bible. I got Herodotus over here, and then I got my inhaler right here from when I had that cough that lasted for 2 months that I tried to edit around, but you could still tell that I had a cough. And then I've got my peppermint right here, and I've got my lavender that for whatever reason, if I just sniff that a little bit, it's like some kind of essential oil, it would make it so I could talk into a microphone better. I'm not sure you properly understood how serious that cough was that I had for 2 months. It very negatively affected my life. So I got all this stuff. It's spread out in front of me while we're talking about things, and I got this sheet of Xerox paper. It's got notes on it, and there's a bunch of stuff on here that we totally already talked about. Parades and the Bible I've got written down here. Job parallels. Do an episode on parallels with Job and Haman. And I'm like, oh yeah, we totally did that one. That one we paid off. And then here's one, time crunch. Okay, this goes all the way back to when we were talking about the addition of time crunches with Haman deciding that he was going to kill Mordecai between the two meals that Esther was having put on. So I did all of that stuff. I got one more note here. Oh, it says oral knots. The John Williams music missing from the coronation theme in Star Wars Episode 4. Listen to that. I've done all of that. But then over here, I have this other note that I wrote down. I can barely make it out because I was so sloppy with how I wrote it. It says, Echoes of Saul and David, Chapter 7. And we got to talk about that. So we got to go backwards. We're in Esther chapter 8 right now. We're at this conundrum point. It's like, all right, Queen Esther, now she has all the power. She's the richest woman, the most powerful woman in the world, according to the text. She got the entire estate of Haman, and Mordecai, her benefactor and her support system. Now he's got the signet ring. He has the ring of power. So now Mordecai and Esther are in positions of great power. What should they do to stop the runaway train? That's where we're at in the story. But back in chapter 7, this is really interesting. It's an important payoff. So we're going to talk about it right now. Okay, you remember the business where the king is like, all right, so what's the deal? What is this all about? Tell me about what's your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it'll be granted. And then Queen Esther answers, if I found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition, and spare my people, this is my request, for I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we'd merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. And King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing? And Esther said, an adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. And this totally echoes for me, and this is why I wrote it down a few weeks ago. I can't believe I forgot. It totally echoes the stuff from the life of David after the whole sordid affair with Bathsheba occurs. You remember this story? David sees her bathing on the roof in this beauty, and the moonlight overthrows him, metaphorically, and then he tries to pass the whole thing off, but her husband, Uriah, who is the most noble character probably in all of 2 Samuel, the book where this is recorded. He will not go home and be with his wife, which is what David tries to do to cover up the pregnancy that has begun in Bathsheba as a result of him doing the wrong thing. And so instead he plots a clever battlefield murder of Uriah the Hittite, an outsider, a foreigner who is loyal to David and the God of David. And it's just a hideous, awful sequence in 2 Samuel 11. But what is sometimes forgotten is 2 Samuel 12, where this gets addressed with David. That goes like this, starting in verse 1. The Lord sent Nathan, that's a prophet, to David. When he came to him, he said, there were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, it drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man in the story and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man." And to me, this is a passage from the Old Testament that super pops because it's got a little bit of the parable feel. I mean, it kind of feels like the parables of Jesus. It has a little bit of the Luke 16 rich man and Lazarus feel to it. And then it has this dramatic throw off the cloak, "It is this way" reveal moment. And David goes from the highest of highs on his lofty moral perch, not thinking at all about what had happened in the previous chapter, to utterly shamed and exposed. And all of that shaming and exposure is a "you have said it is so" kind of moment, a phrase that we saw Jesus turn oftentimes in the Gospel of Matthew when someone spoke truth but for the wrong reason. Is 3 weeks ago me who scribbled out this little note crazy for thinking that there's an echo here in Esther? I mean, everybody in the original audience who's reading Esther when it comes out, they would have been super familiar with this story about David. David's the most famous king ever. David was legendary, but also real. But I mean, all of the stories were on everybody's mind. Everybody knew about all the exploits of David. And they would have known all about this grand reversal moment in the life of David. Now, for David, there's eventually redemption on the other end of this thing. But this decision casts a long shadow, and in some ways, you can track the breaking up of the United Kingdom all the way back to what happens here in this affair with Bathsheba and with what David then goes on to do to Uriah. Feels a little bit to me like in chapter 7 of the book of Esther, when Haman's sitting there sipping on his beverage or whatever. And it's like, what? Now, what do we actually have going on over here with this conversation? And then probably his face turns pale. And then Esther reveals in that moment, that is the man right there. To me, we're in Reversalville again with this quick lightning, throw it open reveal. And the same way that I imagine David turning very pale in the moment, so I imagine Haman doing the same. That's echo number 1. Echo number 2 is all of this business about Saul and how really the moment where his reign went off the rails was 1 Samuel 15, when he did not follow through on God's command to kill Agag, king of the Amalekites. And you'll recall that Haman in the book of Esther is not identified as an Amalekite. He is called an Agagite, meaning descended from this guy, Agag. And in the same way that David, Saul's successor's decisions cast a very long shadow forward into the story of the Bible, and you could even say all of history. So Saul's decisions in 1 Samuel 15 cast a very long shadow as well, as he doesn't kill Agag, king of the Amalekites. He doesn't wipe out his enemy, who is absolutely devoted to the wholesale destruction of the Jewish people. Saul decides to go with a compromise. He decides that there's some political and financial advantage to keeping this guy around. And the prophet Samuel is completely unimpressed. And Samuel himself ends up putting to the sword Agag, the king of the Amalekites, the leader of the people group dedicated to the wholesale annihilation of the Jews. Is this comfortable material in the modern age? No. Is this comfortable material in the modern age in light of ongoing tensions as I record this in the same part of the world where these events took place 2,900, almost 3,000 years ago? No, it's not easy conversation at all. It's incredibly uncomfortable, and I don't think anything is as simple as drawing a straight line between the super ancient distant past and events of today, but there's no denying that the echoes in passages like this aren't just recognizable as we move forward a few pages in the Bible into the book of Esther, but in some ways it's going to feel like there may be even some historical echoes all the way out to today. Well, what is the echo between the whole Saul and Esther thing? It's this. Saul could not protect his people. Saul did not follow through on what needed to be done to save and deliver his people. But Esther does, and she is given the opportunity to throttle it back and make the same mistake as Saul, who throttles it back and spares Agag. She's got Haman, the Agagite, according to tradition, descended directly from Agag, falling on the couch next to her, begging for his life. And according to the author of Esther, she doesn't do anything. She doesn't speak. She doesn't make a move. She just lets him seal his own fate. And look, some people throughout history have looked at the Bible and said Saul was right. He was merciful, even if it was for selfish reasons, toward Agag back in the day in 1 Samuel. And Esther, these critics would say, was wrong. She was merciless. She should have demonstrated higher character so that young ladies who one day would read the book of Esther would be more inclined to get a good moral example from her instead of the example that they get. I would say this. Before we make the final determination on all of that, let's see how the rest of the story plays out. But to the attentive reader, and everybody in that original audience I think would have been a pretty attentive reader who was familiar with this high point moment we talked about in the life of David and this high point moment we've talked about in the life of Saul, I think the original audience would have looked at this and they would have seen echoes of Nathan, the bold prophet, confronting a powerful man who was in the wrong in the way Esther reveals that Haman is culpable for all of this. And I think they would have had to have tipped the cap at how this woman who came from effectively nothing and effectively nowhere rose all the way to this position of power and then was put in a position to either repeat or correct the mistake of Saul. And I think the original audience would have been in awe of how she passed the test and corrected the mistake of Saul. Speaking of correcting age-old generational mistakes and passing tests that in previous times were failed, I think we've done that today because there was a note here and it was interesting. It was important and I forgot to talk about it and now we did. And I think this is now the whole thing is working better. It would have been a real pity if we hadn't gotten to this one. Hey, guess what? I'm about to announce what the next series is going to be. I got it figured out and I'm really excited about it. So that announcement will happen this week. And then there are some cool things that are going to come along with that for everybody who supports the program in any way. And it's going to be a little bit different this time around in terms of what we're doing to say thank you to everyone who supports the program as we move from one series into the next one. More on that soon. Appreciate y'all. I'm Matt. This is the 10 Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.